When complexity works. Delphi-2M and the broader lesson. For much of the history of statistical modeling, parsimony was treated as a safeguard. But what happens when the phenomenon itself is high-dimensional, sequential, and full of interactions that cannot be represented well by a small collection of fixed predictors? Overparameterized models offer one possible answer. Their large capacity is not valuable merely because the parameter count is large. It is valuable when that capacity allows the model to learn meaningful relationships from rich data. In another presentation, I have already reviewed two overparameterized models, AlphaFold and Aurora. AlphaFold demonstrates this in protein structure, where distant amino acids can become relevant to one another. Aurora demonstrates it in weather forecasting, where atmospheric conditions interact across space and time. A third example, Delphi-2M, brings the same broad idea into longitudinal medicine. The medical case is especially revealing because a person's health rarely behaves like a single row in a spreadsheet. Diagnoses accumulate, treatments interact, timing matters, and one condition may alter the meaning of another. Delphi-2M therefore provides a useful setting for asking what high-capacity models can contribute when prediction depends not only on what is present now, but also on the sequence of what came before. The third example brings the idea closer to the individual. Suppose two patients are both 50 years old and both currently have high blood pressure. A conventional predictive model might place considerable weight on age, blood pressure, body mass index, smoking status, and perhaps several laboratory measurements. If the two patients have similar values, the model may assign them similar risks. But their histories could be completely different. One patient developed hypertension only recently after years of otherwise good health. The other has a 20-year history involving diabetes, cardiovascular problems, changing medications, repeated hospital visits, and other diagnoses. Should those two people really be represented by approximately the same row in a spreadsheet? Delphi-2M approaches the problem differently. Built on a modified GPT architecture, Delphi-2M treats a person's medical history as a sequence of events, somewhat analogous to the way a language model treats a sentence as a sequence of words or tokens. Instead of asking only, "What conditions does this person have now?" the model can consider, "What happened before what? At what age? What combinations of diseases appeared? How long were the intervals between events? And what patterns tend to follow similar histories?" The model was trained on data from approximately 400,000 UK biobank participants and externally evaluated using data from approximately 1.9 million individuals in Denmark. It predicts rates for more than 1,000 ICD-coded diseases, with reported predictive performance comparable to existing single-disease models. This is already impressive, but its conceptual importance goes further. Traditional medical prediction often constructs separate models. One model for heart disease, another for diabetes, another for cancer, another for stroke. Human beings, unfortunately, do not organize themselves into separate statistical models. Diseases coexist. They develop in sequences. One condition changes the probability of another. Treatments introduce additional effects. Age matters, timing matters, history matters. Consider a deliberately simplified example. A physician treats a patient's high blood pressure according to the standard protocol, but the patient's condition does not improve, and may even worsen. Why? Perhaps the patient also has kidney disease, is taking another medication that changes the treatment response, sleeps 4 hours a night, lives on takeout food, and regards exercise as walking from the sofa to the refrigerator. The problem is not necessarily that the hypertension treatment is wrong. The problem may be that the patient did not read the statistical model and politely agree to have only one condition at a time. This scenario points to a serious issue. A treatment, risk factor, or diagnosis rarely operates in isolation. Its meaning can depend on the patient's past events, other diseases, medications, behaviors, age, and prior clinical trajectory. Delphi-2M attempts to learn this grammar of disease progression by representing the medical record as a longitudinal, high-dimensional sequence. It can then generate plausible future health trajectories extending as far as 20 years. The analogy to a language model is particularly useful. When ChatGPT predicts the next word, it does not simply ask, which word is globally most common? If it did, every sentence might eventually become the. Instead, the prediction depends on context. What came before, relationships among previous tokens, and patterns learned from enormous amounts of data. Delphi-2M applies a related idea to health histories. The tokens are no longer merely words. They represent diagnoses and health events occurring across a person's life. The question therefore changes from, what is the average risk associated with hypertension? To something closer to, given this particular person's evolving sequence of health events, what is likely to happen next? That is a profound shift from static, global, population-level prediction toward individualized trajectory modeling. It is important to note that AlphaFold, Aurora, and Delphi-2M should not be treated as identical examples. AlphaFold is primarily a demonstration of how high-capacity models and attention can capture extraordinarily complicated relationships in biological structure. Aurora extends the principle into a genuinely spatiotemporal system, learning representations of atmospheric behavior from enormous and heterogeneous datasets. Delphi-2M comes closest to the idea of personalized longitudinal prediction because it explicitly models an individual's evolving sequence of health events. But together they illustrate a broader change in the philosophy of modeling. Classical modeling frequently began by asking, which variables can we safely eliminate? In contrast, modern high-capacity learning increasingly allows us to ask, what complex relationships might we be eliminating too soon? This does not mean Occam's razor should be thrown into the trash. Nor does it mean that bigger models are automatically better. A large model trained on inadequate data can fail just as spectacularly as a small one, and generally at greater computational expense. Rather, these examples suggest a more subtle principle. Simplicity should not necessarily be measured by counting parameters. A model can be enormous in parameter space while learning a surprisingly regular and useful representation of an extraordinarily complicated world. None of this releases us from asking what a model has actually learned. Each of these three systems is trusted only because someone checked it against a world that could say no. CASP14 for AlphaFold. Operational forecasting benchmarks for Aurora, an independent Danish cohort of 1.9 million people for Delphi-2M. Capacity without that scrutiny is not insight, it is only expense. Proteins fold. Atmospheres change. Diseases unfold over decades. Perhaps the surprising lesson of modern machine learning is that, when reality itself is complicated, allowing the model to be complicated may sometimes be the simpler solution. The judgment we still owe is not whether to permit complicated models, but how to tell which complications are real and which are merely costly. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.